Michael, welcome to South Asian Stores. We are so excited to have you today this Friday afternoon. How are you doing?
Samir, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here to talk with you. I'm doing great. I am sitting here in my dressing room at the New Amsterdam Theater on Broadway and excited to get to talk to you a little bit.
Yeah, it's like for everyone listening, you probably heard the intro before, and Michael's doing big things on one of my favorite movies growing up, and I got a chance to see it a month ago, and it was an experience to say the least. But we'll jump all into that. But I want to rewind the clock back to the beginning. Tell us, Michael, where you grew up, what was your life like, and how South Asian was your family?
So I grew up in New Jersey. My folks immigrated from Kerala, from South India in the 80s, the late 80s. My brothers and I were all born in. My parents first moved to Texas, but my brothers and I were born in New Jersey. And so at that time, there were very few folks that looked like me, at least in the area that I grew up in central New Jersey. I come from a very historic but small population of South Indian Christians, and as such, like our our community felt like a small community within a small community. So that was kind of an interesting perspective. We didn't have a lot of family in the area. My dad moved here for work, and both my parents come from, um, I guess, rather large families. My dad has seven sisters and three brothers,
No
so
way.
that's a pretty massive family. And most of them were and still are in India. A handful scattered throughout Europe, and none on his side here in the States, actually. My mom's sisters are between here and India. So that sense of that question of how Indian was your upbringing is an interesting one, because I think it's a common sort of feeling I've gotten from a lot of first generation kids who grew up around the same time that I did, that assimilation was sort of the name of the game in terms of avoiding bullies and finding happiness and success in social circles growing up.
Yeah,
So I think my parents didn't find any need to kind of like resist that necessarily. My name is Michael, first of all, which is a Christian name. My brothers and I all have Christian names, as does my dad and his family going back generations. So I think, the handful of Indian folks that we did grow up around, and when I say handful, I really mean probably, I think in my elementary school class, there was one other girl that was Indian. And then as I got into high school, it became clear that I was not very Indian, so to speak. And coming from a Christian Catholic background where my family didn't celebrate a lot of the mainstream, or more mainstream now, Indian holidays, the Diwalis and the Holi and all of that. It was a little bit of a learning curve, getting to learn about
sure.
that side of this beautiful culture that I come from, because for me it was we grew up going to church every Sunday, and I think that was all kind of very strange and unfamiliar to the few Indian peers that I did have growing up. And so it was, it's a really weird experience to feel like underrepresented within this minority
Yeah,
group.
yeah,
And so, that came with its own series of challenges. And I think because of that, I think I was always aware, obviously, that, of my background, and my parents brought us back home to visit family every year growing up, and so I was very much aware of where I came from, where my roots were. But in terms of like a cultural identity, it was sort of all over the place.
yeah.
I sort of my brothers and I found our own way in a lot of respects. My grandmother was our nanny growing up and lived with us, and so I grew up speaking Malayalam with her. and then like, completely ignoring all of those facets of my personality when I went to school, because it was just easier
Yeah.
to avoid having to explain all of that. And then, coming of age right around 9/11, and all of the like horrible prejudices that arose from that, just sort of like further solidified for me the need to kind of sidestep most of those identities, just to survive,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
And So yeah, my identity was very much Indian. We were just as Indian as any other family, but I think in many circumstances and interactions with other more North Indian friends, or certainly my Hindu friends growing up in high school, of which I should say there were four, that it was very different, I think, from most first generation kids.
Yeah.
We did have family. They were, mostly in the Texas area, or like upstate Connecticut, and we would see them from time to time. So there was definitely a sense of community.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of a roundabout way of saying that I think I felt growing up much more as an American than necessarily an Indian.
Yeah. One of the things that, we've talked to a lot of guests on the show about is as they are struggling determining what their identity is, right? Because many of them are first generation, as you said, is how do I choose a career path, right? Because time and time after again, a lot of our parents came in with the goal of like, hey, here are the career paths we think are the most safe, and here are the paths that you might struggle with. And in your line of work, right, to see representation, especially South Asian representation, is limited. So I want to take it back. When was your first foray into the creative arts? And can you talk about your first play or anything like that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, like I said, I grew up going to church every Sunday, and my parents were, um, I have to give them all the credit. They were very open-minded and liberal in terms of exposing us to all kinds of different activities and social interests, which I'm grateful for every day. And one of those early on was piano lessons, and then I was singing in the church choir, sort of as a just another thing to do after school. And this, like, as a kind of wild, energy filled little brown kid, it was one of the few things that I was good at, and that captured my energy for a long enough time to really get some good work done.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was sort of that first inkling that, like, oh, there's something here. There's a passion, there's an interest, and my mom immediately seized on that and was like, you know what, if this is going to get him to shut up and sit down and practice for a little while and get him off my hands, and then let's see where this goes. So I started out singing in choirs, and that became a very, very serious hobby into middle school, when I joined a professional touring all boys choir called the American Boy Choir. It became like a really formative experience in terms of ear training and sight reading, learning how to read music. And then performing at really exciting venues like Carnegie Hall and
wow,
Lincoln Center in New York, and touring around the world and performing with the world's greatest orchestras, and all between the ages of 10 and 14, and not like really registering how wild and crazy all of those experiences were. But as I look back, just like really formative in terms of instilling like a real love for Western classical music, which was sort of my first love and my first foray into the performing arts. So after that, I went to a regular high school close to my parents' home, and obviously was singing in choirs, and it was a great way for me to meet people, and most of my friends were also interested in music and singing. And then by the end of freshman year, like, all of my friends started auditioning for the plays, and I was like, I had never seen a Broadway play before. I didn't know what really beyond the Sound of Music, or I think I had seen the Bernadette Peters video production of Into the Woods as like a one day that my English teacher didn't want to teach a lesson kind of thing. And but beyond that, I didn't really know what that whole world was about. And all my friends were doing it, and I figured, hey, why not give it a go? And that sort of opened up a whole new world for me. And oh man, I've already said a whole new world, and we're just like 5 minutes into this thing.
Yes, yes, yes.
Forgive me. But that became another outlet in which I could use my voice and this instrument that I had grown to love and find as like a sense of source of my identity, and certainly a way of just meeting people and
Yeah,
feeling like a part of a community. And that sort of continued all through high school. I was able to play some fun leading roles, and then by the time it came around that it was college audition, college application times, there was a real reckoning that I had to go through as far as like what it was I wanted to do.
sure, sure.
And I had this real passion, and all these people telling me that there was some talent and promise there, but very few, if any, role models to look up to in terms of examples and careers that I might hope to emulate. And my parents, God bless them, as open-minded and liberal and forward-thinking and accepting as they were, like any immigrant parents, I think were primarily concerned with me being able to support myself, right?
Exactly,
And
exactly.
and in this instance, when I was like, well, maybe I could do this for a living, they were like, I don't know what that is. There's no one doing it that looks like you. And like, sure, you have the passion, sure, you have the drive and the earliest signs of talent in it, but we're worried that you may find yourself in a position where you're struggling to make ends meet, and we don't want that for you. And if it's something that you really feel like you need to be doing, then we will of course support you. But and at age 18, frankly, I don't know how anybody decides like this is the path my life will take,
Yeah,
based on this one decision. So
yeah,
I decided, it was probably for the best to stick with a more uh, open-ended career path at that point. So I ended up going to a great liberal arts school. I was at Georgetown for a few years before realizing that every waking minute I was spending that wasn't in class was either in one of 4 different choirs, or singing at a church choir off campus, or doing the plays and musicals. And my friends finally were like, what the hell are you
yeah,
doing here?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
clearly your heart is somewhere else. And I was grateful to have a few mentors. And at that point, I had already auditioned for a few things in New York and had some really great feedback from some really wonderful people and casting directors in the city that were like, if this is something that you are willing to put the work into, there could be a place for you here. And so that sort of prompted me to make a big scary change in my life,
Yes.
which meant leaving a very good school by all Indian standards,
Yeah, yeah.
and throwing all my eggs into a very scary different basket.
I want to talk about the decision because that
Mhm.
that is what I think is turning point for many people's life where they have to say, do I jump or do I stay back in my old life? How did
Totally.
that decision come for you? Like,
I
tell us
think
where your head was at.
I think I was a couple years older than that like really naive 18-year-old in high school, but I think I just realized that like if I wanted to do it ever, I had to start now, because this career, um most of the people that find success are at least starting at a relatively young age, in which you can sort of like at least get your foot in the door. And I was worried that I would find myself 5, 10 years down the road regretting not having tried. And I think regret is a really scary thing, and something that I've tried to avoid as much as I can, because I don't know. I think at that point there were some of it was evidence based. There were folks telling me like, here are the things that you're good at. Here are the things that you need improvement on. But at that point, Hamilton was becoming a thing, and like the powers that be were changing their idea of what stories deserve to be told and who
Mm,
had the agency to tell those stories. Um, and there was a show on Broadway called Spring Awakening that was a really inspirational source of art for me in the way that they had cast, you know, folks of all different shapes and sizes and colors, and it was a huge commercial success too, which felt really important and meaningful. So there was all of these sort of different signs that were telling me like, look, if you want to do this, and if you're willing to dare to be the first X or the first Y, why not? And I'm grateful to my parents for having given me their blessing to really just rip off that band-aid and give it a go, and then for a series of mentors that really guided me on the path to get to where I am today. It's been a wild, bumpy road. Nothing
yeah,
about this career is linear or makes any shred of sense, but I think more than anything, I didn't want to wake up one day and regret not having tried. And that, I feel like that would have just eaten me up inside.
yeah. Right, right. Like what you said, I think resonates a lot is no regrets. Just do something, and at least say, hey, I did my absolute best, and then we'll see how the chips fall. So I
Mhm.
want to take it back to you get to New York. What's your first week like?
So I grew up, my folks live about an hour out of the city in New Jersey. And so after I finished school, I did move home for a very long 6 months. And in that time is when I had started auditioning. I come from the classical music world. So in terms of like survival gigs, I didn't have to go the table waiting route, the server bartender route. I was able to get my foot in the door with a bunch of the professional choral groups in the city, which was a
Cool.
really amazing community that was able to help me, pay my bills in those early months and years in the city, while I was training and taking voice lessons and acting classes, dance classes, and getting my name out and into the theater world, which really, it's still at that point I was very much a newbie, kind of
Yeah,
on the fringe of that. And so the first few auditions, it was the audition process is excruciating. It's there are these like massive cattle calls where there are thousands of people hoping to get maybe a handful of roles in these shows, and there's a lot of sort of paying your dues, doing really low paying out of town work, or cruise ships and whatnot, before you sort of like earn your stripes to be able to um, really like do the kind of soul satisfying work that we all aspire to do.
yeah,
And so it was a long journey of getting to meet people, getting good at auditioning, which is its own kind of like bizarre skill that has nothing to do with being an actual performer. And so, or it has, I mean, surely it has everything to do with it, but the skill set is a very
yeah,
specific
yeah,
different thing than performing a show every night. So I the auditions that I was being invited to at that point were very limited. They were very sort of stereotypical, and I was very often being asked if I could do an accent in the room, and all these things that kind of like churned
mm,
my guts a little bit,
mm,
and I sort of politely and obediently said sure, and did all the thing, jump through all the hoops that us underrepresented folks in this business often have to sort of just get our foot in the door. And I was lucky to make a good impression on a couple of the big casting offices here in the city that ultimately led to me getting cast in my first off-Broadway show, which was a review of songs by this legendary composer, Maury Yeston, here in the city, which got me my first agent and led to my first big gig, which was going on tour with the Phantom of the Opera,
Whoa.
which is, historically a very white
Yeah.
show,
Yeah.
the whitest of white for so many years, but an iconic show in the business for sure. It's the longest running musical in history, and so to be a part of that, a show that was like really formative in my education as a young singing actor, and so to be a part of that was freaking huge, and to tour the country doing that for a while, and honestly to just be able to get that check on the box on my resume that, like, here's the first
Yeah.
national tour, a big equity job, and a cushy paycheck, and all of those things that felt like so far in the future when I first started knocking on doors in New York. So
Yeah.
so that was a really exciting moment for me that kind of solidified, like, and I was understudying one of the lead roles, and to be finally seen and respected as a leading man, which was always what I hoped to be. It was a really kind of edifying and like meaningful moment in my career.
Yeah. That is amazing. I want to talk about, the highlights and lowlights, because this is a business, a world that not many people, let alone South Asians, know about, right? They see
Hmm.
the output,
Hmm.
but they don't see all the inputs.
Hmm.
Can you talk us through how you got through some of the low moments? And then on the flip side, tell us some about the high moments.
Yeah. So it's interesting, I often like get asked like, why aren't there more South Asians in this industry? And I think that question is very telling. I think there's so many aspects about this industry that maybe bar folks like us from feeling included, from feeling like the stories being told invite us to be a part of them. And part of it is also that this mode of storytelling, this particular idiom, doesn't really exist, or it hasn't historically in India. So I think certainly the Bollywood um culture is very much the idea of story and song, and the meeting of those is deeply ingrained in Indian culture. And I would say it's probably by output, by volume, the most
Yeah.
extreme in the world, and for decades, right? And I think that's that because of that, what's so interesting is that we are historically in our culture so innately drawn to stories that are told through song. And yet when it comes to doing that in a live theatrical setting, there's very little context for that
Yeah.
historically in India. There's a lot more, as I understand, that's happening these days. But and so just sort of a sidebar, but an interesting result of that is that we've got all these brown folks coming to see the show now, which is incredible. And so many of them ask me, like, "Are you guys actually singing on stage?" And the first few times that I heard people ask me that, I was sort of like taken aback. I was like, yeah, we're absolutely singing live every night. I mean, that's one of the hardest parts about the job, is being able to sing and dance at the same time, and not sound like you're dying and out of breath. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
um but it's not a part of the culture in India. The playback singers, and the and how actors are constantly miming the songs. They're very rarely do you have a big Bollywood star that actually has a singing voice.
Right.
So
Right.
so it's
Right.
that's sort of a fascinating outcome of this like influx of Indian folks coming to see Broadway now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in terms of lows in my career, I've always been more drawn to dramatic roles, and like pictured myself more as a romantic lead, and those are sort of the characters that I found meatiest and most satisfying to dig into. And in even in the early days when things started to feel like people were more interested in having brown actors fill roles on stage and on screen. It was always comedy. That was always the first foray. It was the Aziz Ansari's, it was Mindy, it was Kal Penn, right? It was these folks that,
Russell Peters.
Russell Peters, Rajiv from Mean Girls, all those were sort of the touchstones,
Yes.
and
Yes.
nothing but tremendous respect for those folks for breaking down barriers and doors for the next generation of actors to even be welcomed into these rooms. But I was not a comedic actor, and I didn't want to be, that movie Mean Girls and Kevin G was the bane of my existence in high school. Just like this kid who was just ruthlessly mocked and like couldn't get a girl to save his life, and just like nerdy and
Yeah.
awkward and shy. Anyway, so I very much wanted to, forge a different path, and one that involved like, oh, maybe you could be the object of desire in this love story. You could be the guy that gets the girl at the end of the day, and so I think for a long time there was no one that was seeing that as a possible choice in casting these shows. And it wasn't honestly just South Asians. It was very few East Asian folks that were, they were those typical kind of Asian shows. There was The King and I, there was Miss Saigon. Our Black folks had, The Color Purple and Ragtime, and there were a handful of like very insular kind of like
Right.
boxy stereotypes. And it was really very much until recently that people started to think outside of that box. And I think, for a long time, trying to convince people to open their minds about that was really hard for me, and
Yeah.
to be putting myself out there for these roles and having people say like, oh, you're just not quite the right fit, or we don't see you that way, or
Yeah.
whatever. That was it's on top of the fact that this industry for your average white folk is very competitive, and you deal with rejection on the regular, and that's all fine and good. I sort of understand that to be a part of the deal, right? But beyond that, to then have your physical appearance and your lived experience and your culture be what is preventing people from seeing you in a certain respect, in the way that you see yourself, it can be really kind of demoralizing, and so that was really rough. In terms of highs, I will say that any opportunity that I did get to perform, and if I look back on it, there were very few actually in my career that were culturally specific. And I don't know that it was necessarily that I was like avoiding all of the taxi cab driver roles and the terrorist roles and the, grocery store clerk roles. But I think like for whatever reason, and I do think it has to do with my type and my energy, I just don't really give off that vibe. I was able to be in positions where I was, sort of the one Indian guy in a cast that was very white. And so because of that, anytime any person of color would come to see the show and approach me afterwards, it was always like, hey, I see you. Like, good on you for doing that. Like it wasn't necessarily an Indian person. It could have been a Hawaiian person, or someone else of an underrepresented group that was just really inspired by seeing someone of a different shade occupying a space that
So
wasn't
inspiring.
necessarily designed for them, right? And so I took that as a responsibility and a really exciting privilege to be able to occupy that space, and now, I needless to say, this role that I'm filling right now, which was, the movie was an iconic part of my childhood, your
Yeah.
childhood. I
Yeah.
mean, my brothers and I had all of it. We had the lunch boxes, we had the tidy whities, the bed sheets, all of it. It was just like the action figures, and he was it. He was the prince, right?
Yeah.
He saved the day, he beat the bad guy, and it was once I jumped through all the hoops to get to where I am, to be able to do this every night feels like an incredible privilege, and like such a huge honor. And and to do it alongside of Shobha Narayan, who is our Princess Jasmine, to have two South Asian, South Indian, her family's from Tamil Nadu. So to have two, rather dark skinned Indian folks playing these leading roles in an iconic Broadway show, it's it's a big moment, and one
Yeah.
that, certainly I don't take for granted. And I think the most exciting part of it specifically, certainly, it's my Broadway debut, and it's a big moment in my career. My agents are really happy, my folks are proud, checking all those boxes. All that aside, I think what makes me most proud is to be able to represent my community and my culture in a way that, has historically hardly ever been done. And I think that that's really, really special. I've been able to communicate with, all kinds of kids through Instagram. It's got its pros and its cons, but to be able to connect with young folks who, sure, the ones that aspire to be performers, I'm happy to connect with them and give them advice. But even the ones that are in tech, are in finance, in medicine, whatever, who are just like, I had no interest in ever seeing a Broadway show, didn't know really what it was, but I came to see you because I saw you on a billboard. I saw you and Shobha on that bus rolling by. I was like, oh, there's a Indian person in Aladdin, like we should go see it. And they brought their families, and they're
Yeah.
like, how cool to see you doing what you do out there. And the young kids, oh my God, the young kids coming as Princess Jasmine, and just like coming to the stage door, and just, it feels huge. And I think about what that would have meant to me when I was that age, to see someone doing it, and how, it might have made my trajectory a little straighter, a little bit more direct, or empowered me to feel like I didn't need XYZ approval to pursue it, that,
Yeah.
there was a place for me here. And so, it's been a journey for sure. And there's such a long way to go in I think across the board in the entertainment industry. I think TV and film are very much further ahead than this theater world is. But I'm encouraged and excited by the progress that is being made, and by the new shows that are coming down the pipeline. We have shows that are written and conceived by brown people, like with roles that were intended to be filled by brown people. And that's I think like the ultimate goal, right, through all of this, is to just be able to have agency to tell our own stories, and tell them in an authentic,
Yeah.
real way. And so that's really, really exciting to see. And like, there are so many kids in these actor training programs, and majoring in it in school. I think for the first generation, there's this need to just like survive, right? You get
Yeah.
here and just like make it work, and make your parents proud. And I think for the generation that follows, there's a little bit more flexibility to be like, you know what, we're okay, we're gonna be fine. There are plenty of Indian doctors and financiers and engineers out there. Like, I'm gonna give this a go. And I think that next generation is uniquely positioned to really just like fearlessly dig into it, and
Yes.
and train relentlessly, which I think is so exciting and promising. Because, you know so often what you hear from the gatekeepers in this business is that there is um a lack of talent. The talent pool isn't big enough, and so that's why you don't see as many diverse faces telling these stories. And, frankly, a lot of that is bullshit, to be honest. But I think, at least if in this scenario now we can start to at least not give them that excuse to not put these bodies on stage, I think
Yeah.
that's it's really exciting.
Man, that is amazing. There's so much to unpack there, but one of the things that stuck out from what you said is the ripple effect, right? The fact that you went through so much to get where you are now is having downstream effects, and so many people are now looking up to you where you didn't have a mentor when you're going through your journey now, but people can see you on a billboard, on a
Mhm,
bus, and say, I could do that too, which is
mhm,
so powerful.
mhm.
And that's something that I definitely want to underscore.
And
Um,
even beyond, sorry to jump in, but
yeah, go ahead.
even beyond that, definitely like the concept of, I could do that too. That's a career path that's available to me. That is huge and can't be understated. But But I think even like for your average white person who may come from, a community that's super homogenous, and
Yep.
the only Indian people that they've ever seen are, the doctors on screen, or, the comedians, or whatever it may be, to see folks that don't look like them filling these roles and being the romantic hero and
Yep.
saving the day, just like the ripple effect, like you said, of just being able to identify the shared humanity in people that don't look like you, right? Like I think
Yep.
that's the enormous responsibility that the entertainment industry has in shaping the way people walk through the world. I mean, it's about like breaking down prejudices and just like helping people understand, like, just because someone doesn't look like you doesn't mean that they don't want the same things as you, have the same fears as you, and aspire to the same things as you do. And like, I think that is the real answer to this like horrible uptick in, Asian crime that we're seeing recently, and the horrible brutality against Black lives, and the incongruous approach to interacting with folks, Black folks. And it's like, I think until we get to the point where we all, the media, and the media is hugely responsible for this, that we can kind of understand that your physical appearance has nothing to do with the way that the amount of respect that you deserve in the world, right? I think that's sort of like the big meta picture, that I think
Yes.
the responsibility that, at the end of the day, like, I'm playing a cartoon character on stage, like it's, there's, let's be real, like it is still like a Disney show, and there's fun and there's joy and levity to all of that. But I think like, there is even if it seems like it's a very far down the creek kind of effect, there is a very tangible effect that these sorts of casting decisions have on shaping our our zeitgeist, right?
Yes, yes, and that is a wonderful point. And I think the balance that you can do the two is knowing the deeper meaning of the impact of what you're doing, but also giving your personality, your sense of interpretation of the character. I think it's an awesome way to think about it.
Mhm.
And I want to hear your perspective. Was like, can you give us a peek under the hood? Everyone sees the output, but tell us what's it like to produce a production to this scale, to be on Broadway, to be the Aladdin. What is it like in the background?
Yeah, it's so many things, and it's what I've dreamed about for a very long time. I will say that, through the audition process, I was very much focused on doing good work and being prepared and showing off my skill set in the best possible way. And it's a grueling process. There were 8, 9 different rounds of auditions and callbacks, and my focus was very much on just like each step of the way. Here's the task at hand: prepare, deliver, move on. And then once I finally got the call that they were going to offer me the role, which was this completely out of
Yeah,
body
tell us
surreal
about that. Tell
experience.
us about that day.
So I auditioned for this. My first audition was I want to say at the end of, or like early June of 2021, when they had announced that Broadway was finally reopening after the pandemic. And after the pandemic, we're still in a pandemic, but you know what I mean. And so my final audition was probably, I think, early July. Yeah, actually, the phone memory just came up on my photos on my app, iPhone, and it was last Wednesday was the day that I got the call
Wow.
that I was gonna be Aladdin on Broadway when Broadway reopened. And it was such a cathartic moment of so many levels of just feeling relief after a year and a half of the the real peak of the pandemic, where all of us as performing artists were basically just immediately non-essential and unable to do what it was that we had dedicated our lives to do. And so that was a big part of it, to just like feel useful again and productive. And then beyond that, to be able to be making my Broadway debut and filling this role that's been so iconic and special to me for so many years. It was everything. It was insane. My wife and I crumpled into a little puddle on the floor, and my dog freaked out and was worried that the world was ending. But it was the culmination of a lot of hard work, and once I got that call and got over the initial sort of like sheer like dumbfounded joy of being able to say that I was going to play Aladdin on Broadway, the reality of what that meant and how much work was yet to come to prepare, to learn the role, to then, perform it 8 times a week, which I will say is the hardest part of this job. Like all of that came rushing in and hit me like a ton of bricks. We rehearsed for 4 weeks in the city before the show opened, and it was a very intense process, very layered emotions in terms of you know making sure that it was all tip top ready to go by the time we had an audience of whatever 1,800 folks in the house. It was a unique experience because the show was reopening after having been on Broadway for, I want to say 6 years, 7 years at that point. And so Shoba and I were the 2 new cast members joining the show. The rest of the cast was pre-existing. And so, they all knew their show, had done it hundreds, some of them thousands of times. And so here we were coming in and learning the show from scratch, which was a daunting prospect to say the least, but they were so welcoming and so excited to have us on board and open to us bringing our culture and our identities to the show, and being open to, making some minor tweaks and adjustments as we went in terms of just making the show a little bit more culturally sensitive. And Shoba brought her Bharatanatyam, a dance experience, to help solidify and specify some of the hand gestures and dance that's in our show. And the show is, Aladdin is set in this sort of fanciful world of Agrabah, but even the name Agrabah and the design of the palace, its proximity to the Taj and to Agra is kind of unmistakable. And
Yeah.
the show borrows so heavily on Middle Eastern and South Asian cultures, and so it was cool to be able to voice some of these recommendations in terms of how to make the show more accessible and more authentic, and to have them be like really jazzed and excited about like, this is
Yeah.
great, like bring it on, let's see what we can do to make this a better experience for all parties involved. And so that was really, really special. So there were so many layers in terms of getting the show on its feet after the pandemic that felt really satisfying,
Yeah.
terrifying, encouraging, edifying, all of the things, to the point where once opening night rolled around, I mean, my mom was in the audience. Like, Aladdin sings this song throughout the show that kind of like strings his trajectory and his character arc, called "Proud of Your Boy." He sings it to his deceased mom, and having to sing that song to your mom on your Broadway debut in front of
God.
1,700 people, it was it was I'm proud of myself for having gotten through it. Let's just say that. It
Yeah.
was
All the emotions
oh
must have
my
just been
god.
flowing through
Oh
you.
man. Oh man, you have no idea. It was incredible. And a moment I will never forget. The sheer terror of having to just get through the show and make sure you still had all 10 fingers and toes by the end of it. And
Yeah.
that yeah, I think is what really got me through it, was just knowing that there was a job to be done, a very big job to be done.
Yeah.
But by the time the bows rolled around and I looked out onto this enormous crowd and found my mom, and I just lost it. It was game over at that point.
Man. Man. That is, I can just imagine what that moment must have felt like to you. Like, and not only just to you, but your mom as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think about perspective a lot, and the perspective of how our parents came here, and they provided a lot for us to succeed. And to probably see you on stage was a seminal moment for her, and
Oh
like
man.
the rest of who the friends and family that were there.
Oh, Samir, you gotta stop. I'm gonna lose it again. I'm gonna lose it again. Yes, no, you're so right. And I am so grateful for them for so many reasons, but
Yeah,
not the least of which is that they were open-minded about letting me pursue this crazy thing. And just like, the those early days where, they my parents came from very humble backgrounds in India. And so they were scrounging together the pennies to put me into voice lessons and piano lessons, and like, all the sacrifices that were made to send me to performing arts camps and things like that. And like, without that, there's no chance that I would be where I am. And so I feel
yeah,
an incredible amount of gratitude to them for, even like paving the way
yeah,
to
yeah.
support that. Was It's just huge. It is huge.
Let me ask you this that just popped in my mind. Um, since being Aladdin on the show, have you revisited the movie like your child and watched it again with a different perspective?
I actually, there's this the short answer is I watched it when I first got the audition, because I wanted to like come back to the source material and sort of
Got it.
figure out
Yeah.
like, what the stage play was based off of. And I mean, I had the whole show memorized anyway, but to sort of revisit the specific expressions and mannerisms that, the animators had used with the character, I watched it then, and it was really exciting to come back because I probably hadn't seen it in, I don't know,
Yeah.
a decade at
It was in the
least,
Disney vault,
right?
right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm talking like the VHS tape that
Yes,
my
yes.
parents have somewhere in their basement. So that was probably the first time I'd seen it, and really at least like 10 years. And so I got to watch it then. I did rewatch the live action remake, the Will Smith movie that came out a few years later. And beyond that, I actually had never seen the Broadway show. So I sort of was grateful for that, to not have, someone in my head to kind of
Yeah,
mimic
yeah, yeah,
necessarily, right? So I was able to sort of come to it with fresh eyes and bring my own self to it. And frankly, I don't look like any of the other guys that have played Aladdin. There were, I think, 4, maybe 5 guys that have played this role before me, and we all look very different. I'm taller than them by probably a foot at least, and so that alone, my physicality is very different, and how I carry myself. So it was nice to kind of dive into the material with all of me and
yes,
not
yes.
necessarily
Put
have,
your
these
personal stamp
other.
on it.
Totally, totally. And so that was sort of a gift, that I didn't know I had given to myself by not having seen the show. But I was just thinking the other day, I was on Disney Plus watching the uh the new Doctor Strange movie. But I was scrolling by that, they have all the Disney classics up there too, and Aladdin is absolutely one of them, that it's
Yeah.
probably worth a rewatch sometime
Yes,
soon. Yeah.
yes.
Maybe
That's awesome.
with my baby on my lap. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, man, that's gonna be a moment, be
Yeah.
like, "You see that character? Daddy plays that character."
Yeah. Absolutely. Her 10-week-old self is just like drooling, like, I
Yeah,
don't give a damn, but sure, cool. That's cool, Dad.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I know we're at the last minutes of our interview. I want to end with some of our rapid fire questions. Again, these are questions we've asked the other people we've had on the show,
Mhm.
and I want to hear your perspective on them. Um, Michael, is there an item or service that you've bought recently that has dramatically improved your life?
Um, wow, item or service. The first thing that comes to mind, and this may not be the most profound, exciting answer, but it will be a meal delivery service that I just started treating myself to just this month. Life is wild. Our schedules are crazy here at the theater. We do 8 shows a week. And I have a pretty long commute on top of having a newborn kid. And, it just got to the point where like the last thing I wanted to do was cook for myself, meal
Yeah,
prep, all of those things. And I try to eat pretty clean. This show is very physically demanding, and having a good, clean, solid diet is a crucial part to being able to do this 8 times a week and stay healthy and
look
keep
like
my family.
Aladdin, right?
Also that, right? So finally I caved and was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do this. There are a couple other guys in the building that do it, and it's been a game changer for sure to be able to
Which one
just
do you
like
do?
roll home and throw this thing in the microwave and not think about it. I'm doing a service called Factor.
Factor.
I
Okay.
mean, sponsor me, I guess, but it's delicious, it's great, and it's pretty clean, and so I'm enjoying that so far. That's been a big life upgrade, I will
I
say.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Next question for you is, um, when you think about a book or movie or some sort of art that has had the most impact of you, what comes to your mind and why?
Hmm. I think the like cop out answer would be the Aladdin animated film, but I think more generally, I would say the Disney franchise in general. Growing up as a kid, you know, they were certainly, all that we were watching when we were young. But I think when I think about what that initial spark or interest in storytelling through song, which is really what gets me going, it all comes back to Disney, right? I think they sort of had that industry on lock for the younger generation, and between Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and Hercules and all of those movies that we wore those VHS tapes out. I mean,
Yeah.
man, like I'm so sorry to my parents for how many times they had to sit through those movies, but I think somewhere deep down that was where that initial connection to that idiom of stories that go into song, that go into
Right.
stories, and
Right.
that was really the first of it for me. My parents would watch Bollywood movies growing up, but I think again, as a kid who was just like so desperate to assimilate and be as like mainstream and under the radar as possible, I was just like always rolling my eyes at these movies that my parents, these like 4 hour long movies where people are dancing in fields and singing. I was like, can we just put Hercules back on? Come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was, I think yeah, I think that was probably in terms of just like trajectory, that's probably where a lot of this
Got it. Yeah.
started.
No, I mean, a lot of people are that way, my man. Like, everyone starts with the Disney movies,
Yeah.
the original storytellers, right, in our
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
This next question is something that I'm very curious to hear your answer on. If you think about a South Asian person in your field, and it could be in acting, it can be in directing, it can be in whatever the way you want to interpret it, who is it? Who is someone that you look up to and why?
Wow. Um, that's a tough question. In my particular field, there have been so few South Asian actors given the opportunity to portray leading roles on Broadway, and so sadly, I don't have someone that I can point to in that respect. I think if I'm allowed to kind of step
Yeah,
outside a little
please,
bit,
please.
more recently, it would probably be Alok Menon. I don't know if you know his work at all. He's a trans performer, poet, activist, writer, intellect, just like all around fascinating human being whose work is I'm sorry, I have to correct myself. I think I said he. They go by the pronouns they, them. They are a mind that like completely has me in stitches. I can't wrap my head around like what an incredible human being Alok is. Their work in terms of activism, in terms of just shaking up the status
Yeah,
quo and sort of fearlessly being themselves in this like incredibly honest, authentic way. As a South Asian, especially, our culture has a long way to go in terms of
totally.
accepting alternative lifestyles and not even alternative lifestyles, but just like the full humanity of sexual identity and gender identity and all of that. And Alok is doing really fearless incredible work moving that community forward. And I'm just so inspired by his activism, by his tenacity, by his incredible, by their incredible brain. There's a podcast that they did. Is it called Man Enough? Have you heard of that podcast? Are You Man
Mm-mm.
Enough? I'm not sure. But clips from that interview sort of made their rounds on social media. And the sound bites are incredible,
Amazing.
like truly worth being put into a book. I don't know if Alok is writing a book, but they absolutely should, because the value he has, that their words have added to my general psyche and my
Yeah.
experience of the world are, I mean, unmatched. I can't say enough. If you
Awesome.
don't know Alok's work, go follow him on Instagram, listen to him speak. It's like music, the way that they are able to shape their thoughts and these profound views on the world and identity into where it's fascinating. It's
That's
incredible.
amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely link his work on in our post about this. Michael, this has been amazing. Seriously, man, this has been one of my favorite interviews. Are there any final asks for the audience? Anything you'd like to leave them with before we close?
I think more than anything, I'm so grateful to you for doing this work, to be able to give voice to so many folks that are doing incredible things in careers that, may not necessarily be the first choice for folks that look like us. But I think more than anything, my plea to our community is to go out and support the work of South Asian artists,
Yes.
whether it be on Broadway, whether it be at your local theaters, whether it be movies or TV shows. Um, Ultimately, in this profession, money talks, right? And I think if we as a community are able to prove to the gatekeepers that there is a market for art that is created by South Asian folks, for stories told by South Asian bodies, I think more than anything, that's going to move the dial into the representation that I think we're all so desperate to see. So, identify those stories and those folks that are doing the work, and go see it. Pay the
Yes.
money, go buy those
Yes.
tickets, bring your family, tell your friends, and hopefully that'll mean that in 5-10 years from now, someone like me playing a leading role on Broadway won't be a big news story. It'll sort of just be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, why
Yeah.
not? That makes total sense. Just
Yeah.
another Indian guy doing their thing, So that's my hope.
That's awesome. That's the perfect way to leave it. Thank you, Michael, for all your work. Congratulations on all your success with Aladdin. For everyone listening, go see the show. It's amazing. I got a chance to see it, and you guys will not be disappointed. So thank you so much.
Samir, you're the man. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everybody.